Today, the main segment we'll be looking at today is the nuclear energy debate, where we'll be looking at the viability of it. How do we bring it to Australia? Obviously, today's a very somber day because of the assassination attempt on Shinzo Abe, the former Prime Minister of Japan. This is a man that has stood by Donald Trump. This is someone who is actually quite honourable in what he's done in standing against the globalists. He stood against the CCP, and this is someone that it's crazy that I can't believe that assassination attempts happened. I'm genuine. I'm honestly about that. I've been reading some interesting things about it today. Before we get into the nuclear debate, and we're going to be watching a documentary from Chris Kenny on Sky News. But before we get into it, I do just want to highlight a few things about Shinzo Abe and who he is, because a lot of people, they see, some Asian leader in Japan there's been an assassination attempt, and a lot of people have no idea what this guy actually stood for. They just think, who knows what he stood for? He's just another global leader. Maybe he's just a globalist. Well, no, this guy actually stood against a lot of what was going on. He stood by Donald Trump against a lot of the globalists when the globalists were basically pushing against Trump on a lot of policies. And that's Shinzo just standing next to Donald Trump there. Greg Price on Twitter, he made the point that Shinzo was the first world leader to meet with President Trump after the 2016 election, a fierce anti-communist, a defender of national sovereignty, and a friend of America. Shinzo Abe also pledged to stand with Taiwan over China. He pissed off the CCP for it. I hope the worst isn't true, but it would be a huge loss for the world. This is not a guy that people are actually are aware of, and that's why I'm sort of reading these things out for you, so you understand who is he, what did he stand for, and why is it that we should care about this. I'm going to be providing regular updates about this throughout this stream as the stream goes on when there's a gap in the documentary. But this is an evolving story. We know that the guy that tried to shoot former Prime Minister Abe was detained at the scene. Look, I'm looking at photos of Shinzo Abe on the ground. I'm not sure whether I should show these because it's a little bit graphic for some people. But it does look like there is blood involved, and the two shots that were fired, it looks like they have hit him, and he's obviously in care right now. So Captain Obvious over here. I think the thoughts and prayers of a lot of people around the world, left and right, are praying for this leader. He's not running in the elections, but the elections in Japan are happening in 2 days, and I think a lot of people are a bit suspicious of the timing of this. All right, there's over 100 people listening live right now. Give this a share, get it out there. I'm going to put this nuclear debate on now, this documentary from Chris Kenny. It's really well done. I really enjoyed listening to it from Chris Kenny. I thought he did a phenomenal job. Energy is something where we shouldn't be taking it for granted. It's something that we should understand where it comes from, and that we shouldn't mess with it unless we're absolutely sure about the security of it. Now, in energy, there's a lot of different baseload forms of power. There's fuel, there's nuclear energy, and there's also coal. Now, with nuclear, it's something that Australia has a lot of repositories of in Australia, and we export it overseas, and we of course use it for our medical staff. But what we don't do is use it for energy. In fact, there's a ban on even considering it in the Parliament. This is ridiculous. This is something that it's completely outdated. In Europe, the reason why a lot of them are turning a lot of their nuclear reactors back on is because of the fuel shortage over there, because of the war in Ukraine. And places like France, I do believe they have something like 80% of their energy coming from nuclear energy. This is something we should be looking into. And it's a really interesting debate. It's a very well done documentary from Chris Kenny. I think you're going to really love it. And if you think that there's some people out there that need to know about this, great, beautiful. That's what this is about. It's about educating people. We can't keep having people educated on nuclear energy just from The Simpsons. I understand, guys, why people have a hesitation to it and a not in my backyard sort of attitude. But I think after this, you'll be armed with a lot more understanding And you should definitely share this out so that people in your area can better understand what nuclear could do for Australia. Australia, if we want to be a great country again, we have to have our energy down pat. We have to have it done properly. You can't, we're talking about war, over the last, year or so, especially since the Ukraine crisis. We can't not be energy independent. We've got to have a very strong energy output. And so that's all I'm going to say on the topic. I'm not going to say any more. Let's click start on this documentary. It goes for about an hour. If you want to come back and tune in later, I'll be uploading this on YouTube where you can start and stop it. You can come back on Facebook and listen to it. But without further ado, let's listen.
With Australia and the world now facing an energy crisis, suddenly nuclear is no longer a dirty word. Increasingly, European nations are embracing it as an emissions-free option. And here in Australia, the question now is this. Faced with soaring electricity prices and supply problems, why not seriously think about going nuclear? Well, this is why we should. Nuclear energy scares many people. But are those fears reasonable?
We could produce all of our energy from nuclear right now. The main obstacle is really psychological.
I think there's a lot of confusion. I think people have for a long time confused energy with weapons.
The actual industries, the way the power plants work, it really has nothing to do with nuclear weapons.
If we're going to get to net zero emissions by 2050, it would require a transformation of our energy system on a scale that's never before occurred.
Do you believe that nuclear energy is vital for Australia's future?
I think it's vital for the world's future.
The younger generation is being brought up in a world where climate change is front and centre.
If we had embraced nuclear technology decades ago, we would not have climate change.
It's a good point.
Everybody's talking about it. The climate challenge, how to get to net zero. To do that, we need to stop burning fossil fuels like coal and gas because they pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But do we have the alternatives that can do that and supply our energy needs by 2050? Are we ignoring the one proven, reliable and emissions-free power source, nuclear? Every mother wants a safe, healthy and prosperous future for her child.
I want her to breathe clean air. I want her to not suffer through devastating impacts of climate change. And if we're going to move away from coal and if we care about climate change, the only technology that we currently have today which can replace that fossil fuel generation is nuclear energy. We have every reason to be able to develop nuclear energy capabilities in the future and to be able to have nuclear energy as an option. But we need to start that work now.
And a little button nose.
By the time little Georgina is 30 years old, we're told she'll be living in a net zero carbon emissions world. But how?
Oh, yeah.
So you would see nuclear energy as underpinning your daughter's future rather than threatening it?
Most definitely, and I think the benefit of nuclear as well is that it's not just going to be probably her generation because you build a nuclear power plant and it's probably going to be on for 60 to 80 years.
Whether you love coal or loathe it, worry about the planet or not, there's no avoiding the push for clean energy. World bodies, national governments, state and local administrations, political parties of all stripes, big business, they're all committing to net zero. And most of them pretend we can get there with renewable energy, mainly solar and wind.
We believe in net zero emissions here at the City of Newcastle. We can do this with different energy sources like renewables, offshore wind, hydrogen power. We don't need nuclear.
But increasingly, other environmental campaigners insist this is just not possible.
No, we cannot do it with renewable energy alone. A key part of protecting the natural environment for my children is nuclear energy. That is just a fact. Nuclear energy is clean, it's reliable, and if we embrace it now, we can combat climate change and benefit generations to come.
Don't get me wrong, I don't like the climate change thing, but it's a good point when you're arguing as a lefty. You're saying, oh, but climate change. And they're like,
Newcastle
oh,
in New South Wales
right.
is the world's largest coal exporting port. So in the energy debate, it's ground zero.
There's been a real dearth of leadership in terms of policy in dealing with climate change, in dealing with the net zero emission targets. And what you have seen is local government fill that gap. And the City of Newcastle has been a leader in that field.
Nuatali Nelms is with the Labor Party. As the Coal City's mayor, she promotes Newcastle's green credentials. As a Labor mayor, you're committed to Australia and the world getting to net zero by 2050. Yet you want to keep a coal exporting industry?
Yeah, the juxtaposition is real, but we are literally at the coalface of what is happening in terms of energy, not just in Australia, but around the world. So we absolutely recognise that coal will see out my lifetime. But that doesn't mean you cannot protect those jobs and have a plan for the future.
Regarding the nuclear waste, Tony,
But how
that's
does
coming up
Australia and
later.
the
It's
world
actually
get to
quite...
net zero by 2050 with all that coal going
They'll
out
explain
of the
that later
port?
on.
So everyone, I think, needs to take responsibility for their own actions. And we have our own net zero emissions targets by 2030 for our own operations here at the City of Newcastle.
It just does my head in how big this challenge is, how many solar farms you would have to build to replace just one day's exports from this port.
There is not going to be one energy source that completely replaces the energy sources we have now. And that is why we needed leadership decades ago to actually have a plan that transitions us over generations. That's what would have been sensible. We are playing catch up now, and we are a little bit behind the 8 ball.
Her city
See, we
was
all
founded
disagree with
on
that
coal,
lady.
fuelled by coal, and is still dependent on the coal fields of the Hunter Valley. But Mayor Nelms believes in renewables. She's proud of how this small solar farm supplies most of the council's electricity. So is it you doing your bit, or is it just a gesture?
So for us here, it's about meeting our own targets to reduce our emissions. And imagine if every local government area, every organisation had their own targets in place, we would meet not only the 2030 goal that we've set in Newcastle, but a national 2050 goal.
There are no easy answers when it comes to replacing coal. Coal trains supply this port 24/7. Each train carriage carrying about 100 tonnes of coal. Thousands of ships export about 400 million tonnes of Australian coal every year to China, Japan, South Korea, where it's used to make steel and generate electricity. That's enough coal to produce double Australia's annual greenhouse gas emissions, or enough to largely power 3 countries the size of Australia. Replacing that amount of energy is a massive challenge. How on earth can you get Australia to net zero with wind turbines and solar farms? It just can't be done with the existing technology, can it?
Well, you tap into the hydrogen as a fuel source, and you also have to tap into all the other fuel sources as well.
Except nuclear.
I do not support nuclear.
But why not nuclear?
Because of the risk.
We all disagree with this lady.
You have to look at the short-term benefits do not, I see, outweigh the long-term risks.
This comment's absolutely right. Nuclear doesn't take as much waste up.
We've got around
in
16
terms of
coal
land.
plants in the national electricity market at the moment, and 8 of those are predicted to come to the end of their natural lives in the next decade or so.
After almost 2 decades of subsidies and investment, renewable energy projects now dot our landscape. This wind farm near Goulburn in New South Wales is one of several in the area. There are more than 100 wind farms spread right across Australia. They've been subsidised by the market and they've cost about $15 billion. But they supply less than 10% of Australia's electricity. To supply the lion's share, we'd need 900, perhaps 1,000 wind farms spread right around Australia. And even then, if the wind was blowing nowhere, we'd need something else to power Australia.
I hate them so much. They kill so many of the wildlife. All these conservationists, they're like, oh yeah, we love wind farms.
What we do know
They
is
suck.
we're going to need increasingly flexible generation types to be able to cope with times when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. We need agile technologies to support electricity generation.
To find out how the energy companies think they can do it, we've come to Sarah McNamara, Chief Executive of the Energy Council. We've spent something like $40 billion on hundreds of large-scale renewable energy projects, and we've got to less than a quarter of our electricity share. So how much more investment and how many more large-scale renewable projects are we going to need to get to net zero?
We don't have an exact figure, but we are seeing state governments planning to invest huge amounts of money in renewable energy zones to build more large-scale wind and solar.
Another energy source Australia has in enviable quantities is sunlight. Large-scale solar is now generating lots of hype and investment because Australia has abundant clear skies and space for vast installations. So it brings into question the key point for renewables, energy storage. Obviously it's easy, especially in this country, to generate renewable energy, but batteries simply can't store enough of that electricity, can they?
Batteries have a certain capability. They're not yet at the point where batteries with renewables will be able to drive our electricity market on their own. But we do expect batteries will play an increasingly important role in the future. But at the moment, they are not a silver bullet technology to back up renewables.
By the way, guys, this is not like I'm getting paid for this. I totally believe nuclear is the way.
Successful alternatives. And if we can't do that, then we're going to leave a legacy of increasing problems for the future society.
Professor Barry Brook from the University of Tasmania is one of Australia's leading environmental academics. Is net zero globally by 2050 realistic, and can we achieve that?
The scale's enormous, absolutely enormous. Humanity on Earth is emitting over 30 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. If we're going to get to net zero emissions by 2050, then it would require a transformation of our energy system on a scale that's never before occurred.
Brook is one of a growing number of environmentalists around the world turning to proven nuclear technology as the green answer. Isn't nuclear energy the silver bullet?
It's the heavy metal uranium bullet, but yeah, I think it is a solution that could potentially be essentially the one fix. And that's something that's uncomfortable to a lot of environmentalists or even scientists in general. It's been proven to do the job in a number of nations already. It could potentially do the whole job, but it doesn't need to do the whole job. It could do the heavy lifting, and that would allow for other energy sources where appropriate to also contribute. If we're going to get to net zero emissions, we're almost certainly going to have an energy mix which is more diverse than today.
It's a monumental task, but we're very lucky that we have solutions.
Xeon Lights is a British eco-campaigner who once ran with the Extinction Rebellion radicals. But now she's changed direction.
It's no good just telling people all the time that things are bad and this is a bad thing that's happening and you should just feel bad. That's actually a really bad motivator for change anyway. So I think that they've lost their way a little bit, and that was part of my, departure from that group.
You are a campaigning environmentalist. You're on a mission to save the planet.
Yeah, I am. Doesn't everybody care about the planet? It's the only known habitable planet in our universe. Doesn't everybody care about that?
Can we reduce those emissions and supply energy for the people of the world through renewable energy?
No, we cannot do it with renewable energy alone.
It's amazing that she's come around on that.
A mother of two daughters, Raven and Arwen, Xeon is determined they'll have both the energy for secure lives and a healthy planet.
A key part of protecting the natural environment for my children is nuclear energy. That is just a fact, yes.
But the environmental movement globally has fought against nuclear energy for the past 50 or 60 years.
Yes, it has, unfortunately, and it's time for that to change.
Is it changing?
It is changing, yeah. I find that younger people are very, very open to any solution that's presented to them because they're very worried about climate change. They want to see solutions, and they don't tend to be anti-tech like the kind of older boomer generation of environmentalists who, they're all about living with less and using less. But frankly, those environmentalists have failed us. If we had embraced nuclear technology decades ago, we would not have climate change.
Immersing herself in nuclear advocacy, Xeon last year swam with fellow activists next to the Sizewell B reactor in the UK.
The idea of swimming in the water was just to try and unpick this pop culture idea of these places are dangerous and you can't go near them, and the water's radioactive. This is actually a myth that has been perpetuated by green groups for a long time. Things like the water's radioactive. No, it's not. We went and swam in there. It was perfectly good water.
Hear that?
Hear that? She toured the huge
There's a few of you in the
nuclear
comments.
reactor Hinkley C in Somerset.
It is steel. You've got the inner containment, which is a concrete structure, and then the outer containment, which is a concrete structure.
So I've had an excellent tour of Hinkley Point C. It's been very informative, and I have to say I'm very impressed with what I've seen.
We need to stop building, and this kind of goes against what traditional environmentalism kind of stands for, but it's the only way out, it's the only solution. And actually, let's be honest, if you're building huge solar farms or huge wind turbines, that's building. So I don't see why that's okay and that's seen as green, but nuclear energy isn't.
So tell me why the environmental movement has been so anti-nuclear for so long.
I think there's a lot of confusion. I think people have for a long time confused energy with weapons, and the environmental movement was kind of born around that time, out of the kind of Cold War era. Lots of worry about weapons, and people who have lived through that are some of the most prominent, vocal environmentalists. So they just hear nuclear and they just shut down. They just think of bombs. Once that fear is there, it's very hard to get rid of that. It's very hard to unpick that.
She's 100% right. Everyone thinks bombs. Everyone thinks, nuclear waste. Everyone thinks The
Simpsons.
Simpsons.
I think a huge amount of the fear
so low
stems from
resolution.
association with nuclear weapons. There's no doubt about it. They share the same name. The same
Love
basic
this guy.
process of splitting
Michael
atoms to
Schellenberger.
release heat is the same process. The actual industries, the way the power plants work, the way that they operate, it really has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. They're two totally different parts of our society.
He ran for governor against Gavin Newsom in California, I do believe.
My history as previously an anti-nuclear campaigner. I'm sorry. Pardon. And now I'm here trying to make amends for that, trying to fix that.
In England and across Europe, Xeon is surprising fellow green activists and other citizens with this impassioned call for nuclear power.
Nations and individuals cannot be ruled by anti-scientific rhetoric. This has to stop. This spells the end of humanity.
Problem with nuclear is all the technology is bad. Waste, radiation, Chernobyl, Fukushima. Well, why is Fukushima bad? Nobody died there because of the nuclear power plant. But it doesn't matter because it has that hold on people. So we're going to go out and say it's clean, it's abundant, it's a gift. You know, and all of the nice things. And there will be people who come along and say, you're industry funded. And I'll say, no, we're not. The industry needs to get off its bum and do the work so that we don't have to do it. They have a good, clean product that it should be selling around the world the way that fossil fuel companies sell their products, which is very clever and very powerful. France, in the 70s, they decided to build lots of nuclear power plants. They did not do this for climate purposes. It wasn't really a thing then. They did it for energy independence. They didn't want to have to get their gas from, you know, Russia or Norway or wherever. They did it for energy independence. They had a very good energy security policy. It provided lots of jobs, strengthened the economy. And now, decades later, they have the cleanest emissions of Europe and some of the cleanest emissions in the world.
You'd be aware that Australia is one of the largest exporters of fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, but also of uranium. Does it surprise you that Australia doesn't do anything more with its own uranium?
It does surprise me. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. It doesn't quite make sense. I mean, you could be a world leader in showing how things are done. If you really want to stick it to the boomer environmentalists who are telling us all to live with less, you could show them how you can create a decarbonised future that still gives everybody abundant energy, high quality of life, but just isn't causing climate change.
All we're talking about is a source of energy that produces steam. You're just making your steam from a different energy source.
The issue for the storage of waste is it's there for hundreds of generations, and that's a big issue for people to get their head around.
I think it's vital for the world's future. I think that we're discovering this all the time.
So to this guy's question, they do talk about waste later on, and so just hang tight. They address that head on. It's quite enlightening how much space it takes up and how secure it is.
There they are playing. Wow. So a bunch of us have been speaking out about this. A lot of us who used to be big advocates for renewables came to understand the limits of renewables. We now understand that we need nuclear power.
I still think climate change is a scam. It's a scam. But when you're making the argument to the lefties, you say, oh, don't you want to reduce emissions? Here's nuclear. So of course I still think climate change is a scam.
Misinformation we've been subjected to see so much abundant wildlife flocking to this nuclear power plant. As you might imagine, this is one of the most heavily studied nuclear plants in the world. They have an on-site ecologist. They do nature trips for school children. When I visited, I went to see it myself. They grow pasture beef within a stone's throw from the plant.
They don't have two heads?
Everybody is doing very healthy. There's no three-eyed fish.
Environmentalist Michael Schellenberger has jumped ship. He was once on board with the anti-nuclear movement. Was that you in the past? Were you initially opposed to nuclear energy?
Oh, absolutely. I was raised to be anti-nuclear, like a lot of people in my generation. Came of age in the 1980s when there was a lot of fear of nuclear conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we really viewed nuclear as something almost demonic, something really quite dangerous and terrifying.
B-29 bombers were visiting the empire of the rising sun with ruthless regularity. But it took only one B-29, the Enola Gay, to close that chapter in human history.
It's more than 75 years since the US ended the Second World War by using nuclear bombs against Japan. Now, the global warming debate has forced one-time anti-nuclear activists to consider the urgent need for reliable, clean energy.
We're about halfway through,
There's always
guys.
a period of time where people need to get accustomed to the new technology. The truth is that we could produce all of our energy from nuclear right now. The main obstacle is really psychological. It's ideological, political obstacle. The existing technology is really quite good. We've been using it for over 60 years. The most important thing with nuclear is the same thing that's been important with jet planes. We have very similar jet planes that we had right after World War II, actually, in the 1940s and 50s. But they've gotten better over time, and the people operating them and maintaining them and building them have gotten better at their jobs. Similarly, with nuclear, we've gotten so much better at operating these machines.
Nuclear energy scares many people. But are those fears reasonable? Helen Cook is a good person to ask.
Beautiful girl.
For 15 years as an international lawyer, she's advised governments and companies around the world on nuclear power.
When I left Australia in 2007, I knew nothing about nuclear energy, and I think that's probably reflective of my generation generally in Australia. And so it was an eye-opening experience to me to learn that there was this energy source that we didn't have in Australia and that a lot of countries in the world utilise, and some countries utilise to a very large percentage of their energy mix.
It's a big challenge to the established thinking, isn't it, to talk about nuclear really as the green option?
It is. It is. And yet nuclear is the best green option we have in terms of baseload energy. Absolutely.
That's how you know you're on the right side. It's like the establishment is against it.
Nuclear. Back in the 50s, Maralinga in outback South Australia was a testing ground for British atomic bombs. In the 80s and 90s, the development of Australian uranium mines generated political conflict and widespread protests. There are three key fears people have about nuclear energy. There's weapons, waste, and accidents. Are they legitimate fears?
If we talk about accidents, obviously I'm aware that we've had 3 major accidents that have received wide publicity globally.
Here we go.
3
Let's
Mile
go.
Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima. 3 Mile
Yep,
Island,
we're going straight into
we know
it.
that there were no deaths associated with 3 Mile Island. Chernobyl, the most reputable sources say deaths associated with either the workers who were at the plant initially, so the frontline workers in the first 24 hours of the accident, that there were some deaths there, and of course that there have been a few deaths linked to thyroid cancer directly due to the radiation exposure.
The UN's Scientific Radiation Committee found the Chernobyl radiation toll was far lower than early fears. 28 workers dying from exposure in the initial tragedy and 15 people from related cancer.
But I think most people would be shocked to hear that statistic of deaths associated with the Chernobyl accident. And then we move to Fukushima. You know, that's something that obviously happened within our recent memory, and it might be a controversial statement to make, but I believe that Fukushima actually demonstrates how safe nuclear energy is.
The Japanese government has said several Fukushima workers suffered radiation effects and that one worker died in 2018 due to lung cancer.
But the World Health Organization has said that there are no deaths directly attributed to the Fukushima accident, and that there currently are no and not expected to be any long-term radiological impacts on human health or environment.
It's the WHO, but okay, they got one thing right.
In a small way, Australia has been nuclear since the 1950s. Australia has a nuclear reactor. It's operated here at Lucas Heights on the southern fringes of Sydney for 7 decades. It operates day and night conducting research and supplying Australia's nuclear medicine industry. So here, right next to suburbia, a nuclear reactor operates safely, not threatening lives, but saving them.
I'm functionally somebody who refused to serve in the South African Defence Force, so I'm not a big fan of war.
Adi Patterson was sentenced to jail for refusing to put on a uniform. For the last 15 years, this pacifist ran Australia's nuclear reactor and research organisation.
I think if we can help people to see that uranium is not scary and that nuclear power is a clean, safe and efficient way of dealing with a lot of these things, we'd have a better narrative for our future in energy.
Australia is an energy-rich country with massive amounts of coal and gas, not to mention renewable resources. Why on earth would we go down a nuclear path?
So we can use sunlight, we can use wind, and we can use this embedded high-energy source, thorium or uranium. And we have got all of those in abundance. So from a perspective of international leadership, the idea would be then to get the lowest carbon mix out of the three of those that supported the type of nation that we want to be globally. And the lowest carbon mix must include a nuclear fuel source.
Can you even get to net zero by using renewables and energy storage?
I don't believe that it is possible. You know, I think there's a hazard in suggesting that that is a good method if you've got a better one available. So even if it was a plausible pathway, would you not go for the lowest cost, lowest footprint outcome?
Do you believe that nuclear energy is vital for Australia's future?
I think it's vital for the world's future. I think that we're discovering this all the time. I would say if we want the future that we're talking about, which is a future that is a low-carbon future, that honours the earth that we're living in, and honours the future generations who will have to take over from us, we would absolutely have a nuclear future.
Australia even has legislation that bans nuclear power. Is it unique to have a country like Australia where nuclear energy is illegal?
Let's take the G20. Australia is the only G20 country that has a prohibition on nuclear energy and is not currently considering, nor has it historically considered seriously, nuclear energy.
Former Minister for Resources, Keith Pitt, has been pushing in federal parliament for what he calls an adult conversation about nuclear power.
This guy knows
the
his
message
stuff.
here, mate, is pretty straightforward. Technology has moved. It's like trying to compare the old FJ Holden with what's happening now with a Tesla, for example. Things have really moved on. I think this is a part of the debate that we really need to get across to a number of people, but particularly the Australian people. All we're talking about is a source of energy that produces steam. The rest of the generation piece is exactly the same as an existing coal-fired power station. You're just making your steam from a different energy source.
The paradox is that for decades we've been digging up uranium. Australia is the third biggest producer in the world.
There you go.
In 2016, former South Australian Governor, retired Rear Admiral Kevin Scarce, ran a royal commission into prospects for a nuclear power and waste disposal industry. How big a problem would waste disposal be?
Look, waste disposal is a significant problem, but already we've seen around the world geological storage, deep geological storage being activated. We have the perfect climate here, the perfect seismic inactivity. We've got areas of a nation with no underground water.
Your study actually looked at nuclear waste as an opportunity, both for financial reasons and energy reasons.
Yes, I think the issue for the storage of waste is it's there for hundreds of generations, and that's a big issue for people to get their head around. And you wouldn't do it, A, unless you needed to, and B, unless there was some benefit arising from it. I think both of those things would be applicable for Australia. There are many nations that don't have a safe repository for long-term storage. If the people of the nation felt that it was appropriate, we could do it, and we could do it safely.
I'm quite optimistic about nuclear waste. There are technologies that
Here
are
we go.
becoming
Nuclear
available
waste.
Using accelerated technology and some very clever nuclear chemistry, where I think from about 2045 we will be able to reprocess practically all the nuclear waste that exists in the world. And in the case of the fuel, we will then generate fuel for the next period of time that can be reused.
The farming town of Kimber on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula has become a testing ground, grasping a role in our nuclear future.
So most of the waste is coming from Lucas Heights. Right.
It's a wonderful opportunity for our community and something that really is important for Australia.
Jeff Baldock is a third-generation farmer out here. He's volunteered to store Australia's low-level nuclear waste on his property.
Huh.
Our family owns the Napani property where Australia's radioactive waste facility will hopefully be situated. We have all of our children home on the farm with us. We have 8 grandkids coming along. I see this as a wonderful opportunity to give them a chance of employment and a good life here in Kimber.
The federal government ran a poll to give the people of Kimber a say on the project.
This is a community for which there was more than 60% support. It's a wheat farm, it's cleared, it's remote, it meets all of the technical and feasibility pieces that you would need for this facility, and yet it's taken 6 years, $60 million and a lot of pain and angst, and it's not finished yet.
There are still vocal opponents.
I'm a member of the No Radioactive Waste on Agricultural Land in Kimber RSA committee. Our committee is opposed to the siting of the National Radioactive Waste Management Facility in the Kimber district. We believe the federal government should be looking for the best possible site for this facility and that is not on farming land.
Wait for it.
Tell us about that emotive reaction to nuclear waste.
I mean, there's a whole lot of things that get thrown up, all of which have been disproven. Now, whether that's the impact on local agriculture and what will happen in terms of their ability to export to other markets. Well, if you go to Champagne in France, that's where their repository is in France, right next to some of the the most well-known production for grapes and others in the world. So it's a nonsense argument.
If you're listening to this, give this a share right now. We're
here. We're within the 10
an hour
kilometres
in
from the Pandy.
There is opposition there as well, of course. There are some vocal opponents. What do they fear from this waste that is currently stored all around the country in hospitals?
Well, the biggest fear is always the fear of the unknown. It's predominantly waste from nuclear medicine, so it's gowns, it's gloves, it's needles and bits and pieces. There's very little that comes from elsewhere. But the facility itself, Chris, is absolutely necessary. I mean, this is a piece of national infrastructure, and on most recent advice, every single Australian will utilise nuclear medicine to prolong their life, to help them treat cancer, to identify cancer. And yet it took months of negotiations to get the opposition on board just to support it. And even then, it was done in a way which was not ideal, but we got an outcome.
But if it's such a struggle just to get to this point with our relatively tiny repository for low-level, mainly medical waste, will Australia ever consider its own nuclear energy program? If people had the choice and they were sitting on their back veranda looking out across the valley, do you think they'd rather see across the other side of the valley a coal-fired power station, a wind turbine farm, or a modern nuclear reactor?
To be frank, Chris, I don't think they like any of them.
They just want the juice.
That's exactly right. Not in my backyard. And this becomes the fundamental problem. Look, I think that those challenges are solvable, but not in the short or medium term. It takes a very significant strategy. It'll take a lot of political courage and leadership. And look, unless there is bipartisan support, I just don't see that happening.
Nuclear power can deliver large amounts of power day and night.
There's no reason why we
The
have
moment
to
you
design a
see
power
Bill
plant that
Gates,
looks
you
like
know
a power
that you're
plant.
losing the argument. It's like, oh God,
I
not
don't
this guy.
think that we should be pursuing that type of technology when you have the options that don't have that type of risk.
It needs to be one of those technologies we consider. We shouldn't be afraid to ask the question.
Guys, you guys are going to be like, oh, Joel, why are you putting Bill Gates on? I hate Bill Gates, don't get me wrong. He just happens to appear in this documentary and I'm like, oh, damn it. Kenny's got a few good documentaries coming out, actually. He's doing one exposing the ABC, I think, in a week.
Throughout the last century, this
1 or 2 weeks.
luxury vehicle has established itself as the pinnacle of fine engineering. Yes, it's been part of our carbon-chugging past, but today, this world-renowned prestige brand is working on our nuclear future. Just look at what's up ahead. This is it. They're smaller than traditional fixed reactors that are built on site, and they're modular, meaning they're a standard design produced in a factory. The small modular reactor, perhaps coming soon to an electricity grid near you.
It is designed to be architecturally beautiful. Doesn't look like a normal power station. That's intentional. There's no reason why we have to design a power plant that looks like a power plant.
Looks great.
Alan Woods is Rolls-Royce Vice President of Strategy and Business.
Rolls-Royce is doing an enormous amount across its whole product portfolio in R&D to decarbonise our products and produce the next generation of products which will fit in a net zero world.
It's fascinating, actually, because most people are familiar with Rolls-Royce as the maker of the most prestigious cars and of jet engines, but this is a big focus for your future now?
Yeah, SMR is a big focus, but Rolls-Royce isn't new to nuclear. We've been designing, manufacturing and even operating small nuclear power plants for 60 years. And that's all in the defence side of our business for the UK Royal Navy. So we're not foreigners to nuclear.
Rolls-Royce has a worldwide plan for SMRs that includes Australia. As we shut down coal-fired power stations like this one in Port Augusta, SMRs could quickly replace them on site. My understanding is you could actually deliver to that site an SMR, connect it into the transmission grid and virtually flick the switch.
Yes, it is capable of fitting in with existing grid infrastructure and therefore replacing existing fossil fuel coal-fired power stations. And that's a real advantage because the grid costs can be expensive. So if you have a solution that can plug and play, you don't need to upgrade all of your grid to accommodate it, and it can fit in, replace that fossil fuel generation with a clean generation asset that will run for 60 years.
Internationally, a number of companies are designing small modular reactors.
Hi, I'm Bill Gates, chairman and co-founder of TerraPower.
Oh, God damn it. I wish I could skip this part.
Microsoft founder Bill Gates has invested in the billion-dollar Natrium reactor project in the US.
15 years ago, I assembled a group of experts to explore the technologies necessary to solve the dual challenges of global energy poverty and climate change. It became clear that an essential tool to solving both is advanced nuclear power. Nuclear power
Just mute it out of
is the only
your mind,
carbon-free
guys.
energy source we have that can deliver large amounts of power day and night through every season, almost anywhere on Earth. and it's been proven to work on a large scale.
There are people like Bill Gates who've written extensively on it, and if we believe what they say, we have a huge, huge battle ahead of us. From my understanding, even the International Energy Agency is very supportive of nuclear, and it's actually called out countries that have said that they might not be replacing their existing nuclear, or they had plans to develop new nuclear and have decided not to go ahead with them. And the IEA has actually called them out and said, no, we think that you should be focusing on developing nuclear. And I think there is a growing recognition that we just don't have the technical capabilities in the solar panels, the wind farms and the batteries to achieve the deep decarbonisation that is needed if we want to make a dent in climate change.
Kevin Scarce's inquiry considered the merits of a nuclear industry for South Australia.
Bill Gates is involved in a lot of things, guys, including buying farmland. Don't get me wrong, he's bad. I'm just saying he has his finger in everything.
Well, the benefit that they offer is they're smaller. The new versions don't go critical, so they have natural aspiration. They can fit more easily into the grid circuit. And hopefully they can be produced in a sort of mass way where the costs of it can be brought down to a fraction of what a large-scale nuclear reactor plant costs at the moment.
When you think about an Australian submarine powered by nuclear energy parking at Port Adelaide or in Sydney Harbour, surely it's going to help people become a little bit more practical about the use of nuclear energy.
Yeah, I think it certainly will, Chris, but let's put that in perspective. That's likely to be around 2035 to 2040. If we're going to solve our climate issue, we need to have a lot of action underway by then.
Is a Royal Commission the way to do that?
I think it is. It needs to be one of those technologies that we consider. We shouldn't be afraid to ask the question. We're not saying let's have nuclear. We're saying let's look at the technology and see if it meets our energy needs into the future.
Why would anybody be counting out nuclear, given that we know it's very reliable and certainly is emissions free?
Well, we don't necessarily think you should count out nuclear, but be very cautious about the cost. Nuclear is hugely expensive and complicated. There is a long-standing community anxiety about nuclear in this country. At the moment, we just see it has too many hurdles to be overcome.
The latest opinion polls show more than half of Australians believe nuclear energy is at least worth consideration, but many remain fearful.
It has done a lot of damage, and that does not go away in one lifetime. It takes 100 lifetimes to deal with that type of nuclear waste. And until you've dealt with or have the technology to deal with nuclear accidents and nuclear waste, I don't think that we should be pursuing that type of technology into the future when you have the options of other mixes that don't have that type of risk.
If you're disagreeing with nuclear energy, you're with that chick.
Zero carbon emissions is built on speculation. The International Energy Agency says almost half the planned reductions by 2050 are based on tech that's still only in demonstration or prototype phase. The agency says even with heavy use of solar and wind, we'll still need nuclear power. If you're talking about installing SMRs in a country, for instance, like Australia, what would you tell people about the safety provisions of
SMRs
such a plant, and also
are small modular reactors
and how that would be dealt with?
Our plant is designed to take advantage of passive features. It has a 72-hour walk-away capability, so you could, in event of a complete loss of power, the plant can look after itself without any human intervention for 72 hours, and even then, all it needs is a top of water. So when you talk about the safety features, the reality is it's incredibly safe. From a waste perspective, yes, there's a lot of irrational commentary about the waste from SMRs as well. What I will say is regulation in the nuclear industry dictates that we have to demonstrate what we're going to do with all the waste product and how we're going to decommission the plant before we lay a spade in the ground. But there is a reality, which is you look at the waste from a nuclear plant, we don't plough it into the air, we don't throw it into the sea. It's all contained. It's safely stored in containers. You can walk around the containers. And the 60-year waste produced from our power plant would fit in less than half an Olympic swimming pool in its containerised form. It's completely safe. It's well understood how we store it. And that's reality here. So nuclear power is the safest and cleanest form of energy generation historically, and it continues to be so. The problem we've got is it's only 4% of global energy. And that means that we've got a huge challenge. We need to increase that amount and renewables, because if we don't, all the other industries are putting the waste into the atmosphere, and they'll continue to do so, and that's unsustainable.
Boom. For those of you guys still skeptical about the waste problem, what questions remained in your mind? Because I'm going to be doing an interview with someone in this area.
How significant would it be if Australia were to get rid of those legislative prohibitions?
I think it would be tremendously significant for a few reasons. First, as a lawyer or even as an ordinary citizen, I would expect laws that prohibit things to be doing so because they are unsafe or dangerous. And the facts and science behind nuclear energy simply don't stack up. But what these prohibitions do is that they reinforce or even create this fear of nuclear energy. So I think to overturn those prohibitions would be a huge signal to the Australian public that maybe we need to rethink our current thinking on nuclear.
Do you think younger people will be more willing to embrace nuclear energy?
The younger generation is being brought up in a world where climate change is front and centre. And when you look at the facts and the science and you look at the data and you compare all of the energy generation sources that we have, nuclear has such a good story to tell from a climate change perspective, but also enabling us to continue our current way of life and indeed improve it.
All right, we're nearing, that's it done now, guys. That's the documentary. That's what happened. What questions do you guys have after that? I'm going to be making note of them. I'm going to be making sure I upload them to the conversations I do a conversation I do with someone next week. I'm interviewing them about nuclear energy. Let me know what you think. This is a segment, I've always believed in nuclear, I really have. When it comes to what's going on with the climate change debate, for all of you guys in the comment section that think that, you know, nuclear is a bad idea, nuclear is something that we shouldn't be pursuing, just so we can paint a picture here for a second. You've got all the greenies, you've got all of the lefties, you've got Albo, you've got ScoMo, you've got Alex Hawke, you've got all those, you know, crazy, not conservative Liberal Party people, Labor, Greens, a lot of the people in the Nationals over there, they're against nuclear. So if you're against nuclear, you're with them. Just to paint a picture for you. Nuclear in Australia is something that is opposed by the establishment. Chris Kenny, he's one of the few people that are saying that nuclear is a thing, someone that's in the media. He's one of the few people in the media that's saying that. So if you're saying that, you know, this is always been the plan, no, the establishment is they're completely against nuclear energy. It's completely nonsensical to be saying that, this is just, the things that are going on with waste. I'm sorry, are you being educated by The Simpsons? Are you being educated by the fear campaigns that the establishment have run? You need to reflect on exactly where this information is coming from. If you read some of the books from some of the people that appeared in this, like Michael Schellenberger, it's amazing to see exactly what he had to say. And I think it's honestly the future for Australia. How on earth can we stand up to China? How on earth can we stand up to other countries if we can't get our energy sources right? I mean, we're not going to go into renewable energies. Oh, and by the way, if you guys are against nuclear, and if you're with that establishment crowd, Liberal, Labor, Greens, and Nationals, and you're against nuclear, you're also for climate change. You're also for believing that that's a big threat. Now, when I argue for nuclear, I always say to the people that believe climate change, the establishment people, I thought you wanted net zero. I thought you wanted to get rid of carbon. Well, here's nuclear. And a lot of them, they just cannot compute. And a lot of them spout the same points that have been made by some of you tonight. One person said, I think it's definitely worth investigating. Renewables will not cut it. Absolutely right, Maxine. 100% right. Here it is. My question, which SMR, small modular reactor, should I invest in? I've been on board with nuclear for years. Let's invest and help them out. Look, I'm not aware of who to invest with or whatever. I don't have a stake in this. This is not a paid promotion. This is just educational. I just want to let people know this is what I believe, and this is a really educational thing done in the Australian context by Chris Kenny, and I thought he did a really good job. I think with nuclear or a private company would need to take a massive hit. Jaden said, I think with nuclear, the country or a private company would need to take a massive hit to profits with the ability to poach experts in the field and tradesmen required from the top of the ministries. Sorry, guys, that the comments get cut off. I wish I could actually do it, but it actually gets cut off with this program. One person, Maxine, said, yeah, it's awesome. Go for it. Look, this is just a discussion. If you guys think that agree with it, well, good. I'm glad that you sort of you found this information valuable. Do some more research. Don't trust a thing that was in this documentary. Go home, go look at it. That's the point. It's about having these discussions. If you're against it and you're like, oh, nuclear is not a good thing and whatever, no worries. That's fine. Have a think about the points that were taken here. They addressed all of the points, including nuclear waste. Where does it go? Is it going to infect the land? And you saw some counterpoints for that. Watch back on this. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you really want to support this particular show, just remember to give this a share. It's probably one of the best things you can do. Get this stream out there. I'm going to be interviewing someone on the nuclear topic. And yeah, we're going to be going from there. I don't have any updates on what's going on with Shinzo Abe and how he's going. And I'm not sure how, what's going on there. But I'm sure we'll all find out at the same time in the next few 24 hours. But yeah, when it comes to the actual the next topic I'll be covering, I'll be interviewing George Christensen tomorrow. I'll probably release it tomorrow or on Sunday. We're going to be talking about how PayPal have gone absolutely hard after him, and they've stopped him from raising funds on the platform. I'll be talking to him a lot more about that. And if you know George, he's an absolute legend. I'm looking forward to having a chat with him. I will see you guys later. Thank you guys so much. Veronica said, love your work. Keep it coming. Thank you so much. If you want to support my work, and I know this is somewhat ironic, you can go to this website, www.tpos.com.au/donate to support this show. This is not a typical show. I know we just spent an hour watching the documentary from Sky News, and I'm not trying to raise money off the back of it, but for future shows where I do a lot more commentary and I interview people like George Christensen and others, and I've got plenty more people I'm lining up for next week, we're going to be looking into it. I'll be looking into a bunch of different things next week, including the World Economic Forum, who the representatives are in Australia, who to watch out for, where we're going with the COVID discussion, and what's happening with George Christensen and also nuclear energy. I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much. You guys are great. One of you said, yes, love your work. Keep it coming. Catherine, thanks, buddy. I will see you guys all later. I hope you have a great weekend. If you haven't had a break yet, please have a break. Go and spend some time with your family. Politics isn't the be all end all, and I will see you guys later.